Hey, did you ever hear of this guy named Anthony Scaramucci? He's this hotshot Wall Street hedge fund dude. He's also the host of the show Wall Street Week. Some of you might remember that show. It used to air on PBS and hosted by the late Lou Rukeyser. Well, it seems that Anthony recently brought that show back to life. The show. He did not bring Lou Rukeyser back to life, although if he had done that, that would have been a really neat trick. Anyway, as for me and watching that show, well, that's not going to happen. Scaramucci, by the way, also puts on an annual conference, usually out in Vegas, where all his hedge fund buddies get together and they tell each other how great and important they are, and also why the world owes them a huge debt of gratitude, meaning us. We owe them a debt of gratitude for the little crumbs they pass along to us in their enormously important and virtuous pursuit of wealth creation. Now, Scaramucci wrote a post on LinkedIn the other day entitled, "Why Greater Unionization is Not the Solution to Income Inequality." Gee, who would have guessed he'd ever write something like that? Anyway, he lists 7 reasons why unionization is not the answer, but curiously, he starts off first by admitting that labor's share of national income declined from 1980 until now, even though that coincided with reduced union membership. But he just says, that's not important. But actually, the really important part that he leaves out is that worker productivity, meaning the real output per hour of all employed people, rose 340% in that time. In other words, we made more stuff, we were more efficient in our work, yet we got less for our efforts. So Anthony starts off saying, number one, it's because we live longer. God damn it. Means there's more of us around, and a greater supply of workers means that businesses have the upper hand in setting prices for labor. Damn it! If we only would die, and then we could have more bargaining power and earn more. Wait a minute. Well, hasn't it always been the case that there have been more workers than businesses? I mean, but doesn't it also mean that more workers means more demand for goods and services, and therefore greater demand means businesses need more workers to satisfy the growth in demand? No? Anthony? It doesn't work that way? But next he blames automation. Yes, automation, things like steam engines and railroads and mass production and electricity for everybody, and then on to computers. And wait a minute, haven't we seen this movie before? Yeah, we've kind of had automation and modernization throughout history, but we have not seen a parallel decline in worker share of national income, anything like this. Is kind of like the 1920s, which, if I recall, that didn't work out too well. Then he blames China's currency, and Anthony says that China, that no good China, it's kept its currency weak, and therefore it's costing jobs. Jobs are flying out. Jobs are going to China. We're outsourcing jobs. Yeah, outsourcing, kind of like with those trade agreements, which I'm sure Anthony supports, where we outsourced millions and millions of jobs. Remember NAFTA, Anthony? And by the way, there's one in the works right now called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a hugely secret trade deal that I'm sure Anthony supports. And actually, now that I think about it, China's currency is up like 30% in the last 10 years. And worker compensation has, yeah, you guessed it, it's gone down as a percentage of GDP. So much for that theory. Then he blames central bank policy. Central bank policy. What do you mean? Oh, you mean like lower interest rates? Well, wait a minute. Yeah, I could kind of see that, right? Lower interest rates, company can pay down debt with equity when the rates are low, and that helps earnings, and it doesn't really help workers. I kind of get it. But Anthony, what about the corporate tax cuts? What about the deregulation of the financial sector where you work? What about union busting? We've seen a lot of that lately too. And by the way, corporate profits as a percent of GDP, they skyrocketed from 2002 to 2006, basically when the Fed was raising interest rates. The Fed, remember that? The Fed took rates from 1% to 5.25%, and corporate profits at the same time rose 150%. And once again, labor gets nothing. So he says, all right, forget all about that. We need less unionization. At the beginning, he said the decline in unions correlated with a decline in labor's share of national income. Right now, he says, no, forget all that stuff. We need less unions. The unions are to blame. Yeah, blame the unions because they make the economy less competitive and shrink the pie. Well, shrink the pie for who, Anthony? For the corporations? Anthony, the income stays in the economy. It doesn't fly out into outer space somewhere. If labor gets more and corporations get a little less, well, isn't that what we're talking about here? Like a little bit more equality? Isn't that what this whole thing is about? And by the way, the only competition we're talking about here is between workers and corporations. And I think everybody will admit that corporations are winning this hands down. And then he says it's because of all the skills are mismatched. Jesus, if I hear this one more time, I'm literally going to be sick. Here in New York, you got PhDs driving cabs and working at McDonald's. I mean, this stupid claim has been so debunked, it's ridiculous, that I don't even want to get into it. But just let's suffice it to say that you could take now a computer engineer's salary, very high skilled position, right? Even that has not kept pace with corporate profit growth. And finally, Anthony says something that makes sense. Lack of fiscal stimulus, he says. Yeah! Bravo, Anthony. But wait a minute. Then he goes on to say fiscal policy should be more about tax cuts for corporations. Oh, God. You knew that was coming. That's what gave the huge gains to the corporations and nothing to the workers. And by the way, Anthony, just so you know, 80% of all federal taxes that the government collects are payroll taxes, withholding, FICA. That's $2 trillion out of the $2.6 trillion. Corporations last year, they paid $345 billion. That's 13%. That's it. Anthony, now I'm sure all your 92,000 followers on LinkedIn and your hedge fund buddies, they're going to love this article that you wrote, but it's fallen on deaf ears for the rest of us, my friend, and for a good reason. I'll tell you why, and I'll paraphrase Matt Damon from Good Will Hunting. Remember that movie? That was a great movie. You dropped 200 grand on a fucking education you could have got for $1.50 in late charges at the public library, and you still would have been reading the wrong books. I threw that one in there at the end. Anyway, that's it for now, folks. This is Mike Norman saying see you next time. Bye-bye. And oh yeah, Anthony, if you want me to come on your show and debate this, I'm more than happy to do that. Bye-bye.